All right, we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. We're excited to be here today to share a little bit about our journey as we went into creating an Alteryx data model. My name is, this isn't going forward. There we go, okay. My name is Steve Yena. I'm the Associate Director in the Graduate College's Technology and Data team.
Sorry, Steve forgot his name there for a second. I'm a little worried. My name's Jeff Long. I'm the Planning and Data Analyst Principal for the Graduate College, and I work with Steve.
So our goals for today are, we want to walk through the creation of the new data model and kind of some background history into where we started, where we ended up. We'll discuss some of the design, development, and QA process we followed, highlight several Alteryx tips and tricks that we learned along the way. And then we'll share some different reports and data sets that are available through this data model that may be of benefit, helpful for someone in the ASU community. And then we'll save time at the end for questions. Just real quick, before we dive in, just to, if you're not familiar with some of the different data tools that we have to offer for ASU and the Grad College, we have a number of different data dashboards. So our first is the Graduate College Leadership Dashboard. This provides aggregate trends over time, series of different dashboards ranging from admissions, enrollment, attrition trends, degrees awarded, assistantships, postdocs, and accelerated masters. So a lot of different things there. And it's really meant to provide strategic decision making for grad programs, help with program priorities and development. The second is our grad student progress site, which is really our bread and butter operational data set. And this data model is what drives most of those reports that we'll talk about. And then we have in partnership with ET and Provost Office, a new grad persistence dashboard that's in pilot stage right now. So looking at persistence rates, graduation rates over time. Very similar if you're familiar with the undergrad retention dashboard, the look and feel is very similar for the grad side. So if you're interested in the pilot or even feedback, we welcome that. Let me know. And then lastly, we have our student support site, which is looking at research assistant, teaching assistant information, and then some of the required training courses for new hires that are required to take. So to dive into the presentation, just a little bit of background about where we started with grad student progress data in general. So in around 2010, maybe before that too, but that predated me, there was a grad degree progress series of reports that were available on the quarter dashboard. And they looked like this. So they had some real basic information that was available. You could go in and pull some different reports for active students enrolled or eligible, could go down to your program. There wasn't much more than that. So that was kind of the first iteration of where we started. And then in 2015, there was the original grad student progress tabular model that was developed. So this was in partnership with ET, Grad College, Enrollment Services, and the Provost Office. Took about a year to develop this. And I'm going to go, this is what it looked like. And it was great. It was a workhorse. It worked really well. It helped provide the kind of early grad student progress reports that we had out there. It was really inefficient and really hard for us to maintain because it had a lot of very complicated SQL. So a couple of those measures in there that were the current and the historical each had over 3,000 lines of SQL. So making changes to this took time. You had to clear your calendar for multiple days to get this thing, any new changes. So it was inefficient and it took a lot of time to develop new reports and fields that were available. So we had that till around 2020, we started to dabble in Alteryx. We did a proof of concept, taking basically what existed in that tabular model and just replicating it in the different kind of connections. Didn't gain any efficiency or really any flexibility, but it allowed us to write to a flat table, which is helpful because then we could actually introduce Tableau into our suite of tools. Up until that, we had to use Report Builder for everything because Tableau did not play well with the tabular model. So that was a value add for us. So we kind of watched that for a little bit to see if it was going to be stable and whether we wanted to go all in, basically. And then right around that time, Data Warehouse was transitioning to Redshift. So we needed to come up with a strategy for how we were going to move that tabular model. So after some consultation from Stephen White, who was fabulous, we decided to go all in with Alteryx. as our replacement. And really, for me, the biggest selling point was the flexibility. So we could take that 3,000 lines of SQL for a couple of those different measures and really break those up into smaller kind of micro data sets. And then some of the efficiencies. So the other one that was a huge selling point for me was in Redshift, correlated subqueries don't play nice. And we had probably 600 lines of SQL for correlated subqueries. So all of our interactive plan of study data is doing a lot of max effective dating and effective sequencing kind of over and over again for all these different milestones that we're looking at. In Alteryx, it was like 2 steps. It was like 3 lines of code here. Yeah, so that would partition by, and you can see kind of the row number. And then we had a formula for all the different 15 or 16 milestones. So that to me was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. So that was all right, we can do this. So the goals of our project were to be more efficient and flexible data models so we could respond to, the business needs. And as, new reports are needed and data elements, we could react to that in a timely fashion. It had to include all the current fields, and we wanted to include some new fields as well. So things like staff advisor assignments, some more Coleman experience information, and some of the different special populations. It had to easily connect to different BI reporting tools, and we had to be able to maintain it in our team. So we chose Tableau as our we're going to move everything out of Report Builder and have one BI tool, Alteryx, and then we're going to write everything to user tables. We got a little bit of a late start on this too. So we had about 4 months to get this all done. So from July to October, we really pushed the deadline here. So we had 4 months to do this, and I don't think we would have accomplished it without Jira. Personally, we had that really kept us really an organized manner. There was 4 of us on the team that worked on this project pretty much 100% for that 4 months. We used the Jira Scrum board, so we broke everything up into weekly sprints and broke up the tasks and features and all that. And then we did daily, sometimes multiple daily check-ins on things. We made the deadline just barely, but I think I lost all the rest of my hair after that. So this is just an example of what we had, about 125, I think, tickets in there. And then it's maybe hard to see, but sort of our kind of example of what our sprints looked like. And so we pulled things in, had our backlog, and worked through that week, and then on and on from there. And this is just kind of talking through sort of our development lifecycle here. So from the actual data model creation, so we broke our development work into sort of just the kind of the chunks of the logic we need to do. So we may do one for demographic information, one for iPod milestones, one for RATA, and that was sort of how we broke the development work on there. And then once the developer was done with development, he or she would do unit testing, and then they would assign that task to one of the QA testers who would be doing all the data validation. And from there, when they were done documenting their test plans, they would do a technical review. And then for the data model, we would push that out and kind of work iteratively through that. And then for when we started doing the actual retrofit, so we had to retrofit every one of our student progress reports at the same time. I think we had 30 or 40 reports to get through. So from there, we would then push everything into we had a dev analytics site, so we could publish everything up there and just make sure everything published great. And then I would do a final review of everything. And then we would send it over to our business user, kind of stakeholder, to make sure they were happy with what we had before we let anything out. So a lot of steps, but Jira helped us kind of keep things in line with the workflow there too. We push it up, and then we would link it to the analytics site. So we were doing this probably, I'd say, for the whole month of October, sort of our retrofit of all the reports, and kind of on a daily basis. So with that, this is an example. This is what the new Alteryx data model looked like. It has over 225 fields, runs in about 20-ish minutes, Jeff, compared to on a good day, yeah, compared to the tabular model, which was over an hour to run. So I'm going to hand over to Jeff now for talk through the next part of the presentation.
All right. So in context, I'm one of the newer guys. I've been here about 7 months, so I missed all that fun by about 6 months. So I just gotta kind of come in and take a look at stuff and figure some things out. amongst it. So that's a little bit of the context for some of the things I'll be covering. But again, when you look at this data model, when we break it down, we have about 22 total containers across the model. Most of those are various input containers. You can see the listing there. iPods and course information is a different color because we're going to go a little bit more into detail on that one. But we basically set up all of our inputs, and then we have a separate container that has a number of joins that are joining all the outputs from the various input containers. Then we have a container dedicated to our field order. And then we also have 5 different containers that specialize in outputs of various shapes and sizes and fun colors and stuff like that. Again, I think having that built that way allows us to really focus on a container at a time when we're doing that editing. We don't necessarily have to look at, here's the entire scope of the model. We have some segmentation that we can specialize and dig in, and it's become helpful on some of the things we've been doing lately with it. So again, if we break down the big container, so we've got one large container that itself has subcontainers, for lack of a better term. I think there are 13 or 14 there that are listed. And this is coming out of our iPods, which is our customized version of PAWS for those of you that specialize in undergraduate work. So on the graduate side, we have a lot of customization in PeopleSoft designed to support our graduate business processes. And this is where we work through it all to make sure that we've got the output that we need for our graduate staff downstream. So even within that one container, we've got a lot of stuff going on just within that that drives a good chunk of our of the output and what we're able to deliver in terms of our reporting. When you also look at, so one of these individual containers, looking at the career and term info, you kind of see a rough idea of how it's constructed. So we've got 3 in-database connections with the data streams built in, with unions, with joins built in. They're all driving towards an output that's coming out. I'm sorry, in-database connections to selects to the joins. Then we're doing a final select leading to the data stream out that goes to those all wondrous joins with some of the output from the other containers. Within this one container, within those in-database connections, again, we've got one that's 137 lines of SQL, one that's 23, one that's 97. So within that first in-database connection, we're pulling, I think, 6 different fields that we're depending on that for. That second one is pulling a good chunk more. And then that last in-database connection is pulling 4 different fields. And once we run through those joins within the container, you'll see there on the right, well, you would see it if the pretty pictures of me and other folks weren't in the way, but there's a list of fields there. And so in terms of what the output, that data stream out from the container is sharing with us, and the information that we're eventually going to use in the breadth of our model. When we look at those outputs that we have, we're generating 5 different user tables from all of that work. So we have an enterprise level table that's available for the general population, and we have 4 that are available within our team schema. We have the current, which is intended to be for the current term, and we'll be talking about that a little bit more here in a minute. Then we have a future that we have available that's looking at terms yet to come. We're finding there'll be some tweaks, I think, made to that as we're moving forward. We haven't fully used that, I think, to its potential, but we're looking at ways to do that. And then we have 2 historical ones. The historical one has kind of been established since this was created. The prior term is actually a fairly recent one that I'll be talking about again a little bit later, in terms of we had a particular use case come up to create this table. It seemed to be the most efficient way to solve a problem that we were having. So that ended up being created. We're also generating an export that goes out into Dash for other users to have information on. Then we also have this is kind of a redundant resource, but we've got a field info Excel that is used in how we sort and how we select the fields that we're using within the model. And it kind of, the model regenerates it in terms of how we're able to use that and tap that in through through the workflow. We also have kind of the final one is a Salesforce Marketing Cloud export that goes to an FTP site that then Salesforce picks up and uses along the way. This is actually you may have noticed it, kind of stands out when you look at the model as a whole, but this is what that workflow looks like. Again, there's lots of twists and turns and curves and stuff like that just to get that file flattened out and uploaded for use in Salesforce. And so we've got a few steps. I think we've learned some lessons along the way just in time I've been here in terms of clarification of how that works, how it's tied to. We've had some practical issues with field size in terms of when changes were made in PeopleSoft. We need to make sure we made those changes downstream. So working with Salesforce can be a little tricky just in terms of making sure we've got 3 or 4 different systems. We need to make sure the specs all align and that we're able to keep that process going as we move forward. Ultimately, when we look at what do we use this model for, a lot of the focus, I think, as Steve mentioned, is on our graduate student progress reporting for that analytics group. We've got about at least 23 different reports that are derived from the model directly or indirectly, and there's probably some that are missed there. We've been trying to create some more documentation around that, so it's easier for us to pull and know if something happens that what we need to go back and fix. And then within this site, again, this is a site that's primarily the general use is for our graduate support staff and academic advisors and folks out, not only within the graduate college, but within all the colleges across campus and other users who need access to, again, the day-to-day operational data. And so when we look at kind of the year from October 20th to October 20th, we've had roughly 343 unique report page viewers. So folks who have clicked through to at least get to the reporting page, and then for a total of over 18,000 page views within that. So it's relatively heavy use, especially across the breadth of our reporting and what we're doing. So it's kind of our most frequently used reporting within all of our user groups. One of the more kind of novel reports we have available is a customizable report. Basically, it allows a user to go in, pull up the report, and they can create their own report from there. It's got a data connection to the model. It's built in Tableau server, so they can build it there, and then they can save it to their personal space and have access to go back to it. So we've kind of opened that up and basically said, if you can go and build your own report, you don't have to, put in those requests to us. We still get plenty of requests, don't get me wrong, but this is certainly another option for self-service for a lot of our users, and does get a bit of traffic, all things told. And so we've got that available within the scope. So I mentioned kind of going back to current term and how it's affected some of the work that we do. This is all kind of, since I showed up, this has kind of come on the radar and become a more significant issue. And so within the model, there's a calculation that determines what the current term, how we define current term, and it's based on the term end date in comparison to the sys date. And what it effectively means is that our current term changes when the model runs, when the workflow runs the morning of the last day of a term. So on December, I think it's December 12th or something like that of this semester, that's the last day of fall. That's when our current term will change over to spring. And what had been happening as we were setting all this up is our support staff within our college and by way of all of our external constituents that are using the reports raised concerns because at that time, they're still doing extensive end of term processing for the students that are coming through and trying to graduate and getting their results in and making sure that their degrees are being conferred, excuse me. So what we ended up doing, and it took a few iterations of this to try and get to a workable point and find what seemed to be the best solution right now, was that we created that prior term user table. And we've kind of shifted our reports. We've shifted a set of reports that were using the model or derived in some way, shape, or form from the model to have both a current term and a prior term displayed. Oh, did I go too far? So there's some other stuff that's supposed to be on that slide, but we're having some technical difficulties, so I apologize. But what you would, so imagine you could see a title of a report, and again, within Tableau, when you're looking at it as an end user, you've got one tab that says current term, and you've got another tab that says prior term. And amazingly, so one report's going to say active fall 22 blah 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 report, and that's going to be our current term report. Our prior term report is going to be summer 2022, and the way that the workflow has been set up for that prior term table, that's automatically going to change and shift over with the current term changes. So it looks at, okay, what's the current term? We're pulling that from our GSP current user table, and then the prior term user table is designed to pull the max term from the historical user table and use that to generate just that prior term data set that we're using in these reports. And we've got about, I think about 25 reports in total right now that we've converted over this format. And hopefully that's a sustainable solution for those users over time. So we'll wait and see. Every time it comes up, more issues are brought to us, and so there's more stuff for us to fix. So hopefully we'll find an end game there of, okay, are we settled? Do we know what we're doing? Okay, great. We'll move forward with that. Again, coming as a new guy, one of the things is I have a little fresher set of eyes, and I'm a little bit separated from all the stuff that's going on. And so as I've been doing my work, I've been saying, there's making some observations about the model and some of the workflows and some of the things that are coming up. And so I've kind of put together, when we talk about the future and where we're headed with this model, I think some things have come to mind, and just in practical experience and some requests that we've had. So the first thing is just looking at, I'm borrowing Steve's term, technical debt, and just known issues. There are some things that maybe aren't quite functioning as we intended them to in the model. So how do we go back and tweak the workflow or tweak how we're pulling that information to get to exactly what we're looking for? Some of those are easier than others. And so, we've got short and long term. You'll see I've got a Jira Epic set up where I'm trying to file all these to keep them in mind and make sure that we're having them on the radar as much as possible. We've also got user requests for, hey, can you add this? Can you add that? Can you add another thing? For those of you who are on the Where's That Data channel, you might have noticed I posted a question about first generation indicators on Friday, and there was quite a lengthy response. So you might guess that, hey, maybe we're going to be adding that at some point in the near future, and those pop up from time to time. We're also looking, we have a set of reports that are still built on custom SQL that we're hoping to make some enhancements to the model that will allow us to change it over and use the model as the base for that data source, as opposed to the custom SQL, just to increase some efficiency, and also to make sure that we are trying as best as possible to provide a standardized set of data, that we're not using multiple data sources that all produce a little bit different data. So to minimize the questions that we might get from users involved in that. We're also, and this ties into that future data table. Right now, the model's built to really pull the within all systems what their status is as of today. We know that we have cases, the most particular use cases that we have applicants who have deferred their admission term, that the effective date for that has been post-dated, and we're not necessarily picking that up in the model. And so someone who their effective status as of today is to be admitted to fall 23 when they've already deferred to, or they've admitted to fall 22, they've actually deferred to spring 23. We're not necessarily reporting it as such, and so we need to make some adjustments to try and capture that future effective dating in the model. I'm also in my big dreams, and again, this is not going to get done tomorrow, but hoping that, again, our historical model is somewhat built on current data and that effective data. And so hopefully in the to long term, we can look at trying to build more of a census table based or other snapshot table based historical model that truly captures a snapshot by semester that we can use historically over time to show where our students were at a given point in each term. We have a subset of programs You might have heard of them as the 4+1 programs. They've recently been rebranded and reintroduced as the accelerated master's programs. Because that's an overlapping set of, we've got graduate students, we've got undergraduate students, we've got programs with no students. There's a lot of different layers to that. And right now we've got, I think, 5 or 6 different models that we're using to report on that information. So we're hoping to consolidate that down to one source that, again, we can monitor a little bit more directly, and again, maintain the quality across the board of what that's going to look like. We have that built in to some extent in the model, but again, there's a lot more outside of what the model is designed to do right now that we need to incorporate there. And of course, you can never have too much documentation. We have a kind of a rough outline of what all the different fields are, and we have narrative descriptions for those. But I'd like to, hoping to get a little bit more deeper into what that looks like. I'm actually admission. I was, if you were at my presentation yesterday, where I talked about the admissions application table, they have a fairly nice, I think, accessible data dictionary that goes into that depth of information in terms of SQL and how the fields are derived and calculated. That's kind of my aspirational goal for where we can get to when we're looking across the model. And I know I refer to the model a lot. That's that's the generic term in use in practice. So for those of you who have a business need and you're like, wow, I didn't know these reports existed, I'd sure like to get my hands on those because that would help inform my work. You can make a request. It is vetted. You do need to have FERPA access, and I can't stress that enough. You need to have your FERPA tutorial completed, or else you're going to get an email saying, hey, you need to complete your FERPA tutorial. But you are able to visit our analytics access page within the graduate college. The URL is up there. We do have a form. It's the general ASU access request form that you'd complete, and then once that request has been submitted, generally we try and turn that around as fast as possible. And again, you can have access to the glorious world of graduate student progress or any other analytics sites should you have use for them. So I think with that, that's our prepared content. So we will turn it over to the good folks in the room and watching at home and see what questions you might have for us.
My question is about your data sources in the grad college ENT versus grad college team. Do we or could we have access to both of those so that we could pull from your data in our own reports?
So and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, the ENT one is essentially a replicate of what our internal one is. It's just a few less fields in there. So they should be essentially consistent. Yeah, I mean, that might be something we could look at getting into the enterprise too. So.
And if you do have access, if you already have, and I believe you have access to graduate student progress, if my mind is not playing tricks on me, you would have access to some of those prior term reports and be able to download the data from there too. So I mean, certainly there's some options available now, but certainly we can have discussions.
Are you currently pushing your historical data into Redshift, and do you have plans to do that once you finish your models so that folks can access that historical data through Redshift as you build it out?
I think everything's right now being pushed back into AUDB just in our user tables. I don't know that we have any data that we're primarily using Redshift for all of the data. So I don't know that we'd have a use case to push it back.
But we may want to talk through then. But we do, I mean, we could put in Postgres too.
So we use the IPAWS data to process graduation, to post the degrees. And we've been trying to find time to actually write the requirements to automate that in PeopleSoft. And the person who knows the most historically about the IPAWS data doesn't have a lot of time. And now we have a new analyst who really excels in Alteryx. So I'm wondering if we could dig into maybe a copy of that or the details or documentation that would get that person up and running faster and what he doesn't know about IPAWS. so we could automate the graduate degree approved process.
I think that would be great.
Okay.
And we can talk too. I think we have some stuff longer term of and the iPods of like on track, off track, need attention based on all those indicators that might complement nicely into that too.
I hope so. I think it's the milestones that have been hard to figure. Thank you.
Do you guys have some of what you built documented aside from having it in Jira? Like what you were asking, like what are the kind of core rules for anybody who wanted to know how that data was built?
Narratively, yes. Maybe not down to the emissions data dictionary, but
And that we are, that is on the, that's on the list. I think that's one of the things that with the model, there's areas for improvement in terms of even how we're documenting some of those milestones in there. Especially particularly for plans that require multiple milestones. I think that's where that's where we're finding a potential gap right now, is that we need to find a way to capture multiple milestones as opposed to just one right now.
it is in Calibra though. So yes, part of the dash export does go to Calibra with the narrative of each field and what they do. So we have that.
You mentioned technical debt. Can you explain that a little bit more?
I guess for me, like a couple examples. One is what we were just discussing. I think in terms of those iPods milestones is again just looking at a kind of a opportunity to tweak the model to capture some better information. I think another example is we have an enrollment hold indicator that, because of how the partitioning is done, may be missing some holds that are applied that are preventing enrollment. And so we've got to look at tweaking that a little bit better to see how we can make sure that we're capturing any hold that's affecting enrollment status for a student. So I think those are a couple of examples of where I think just in practice and in working with our end users, we've identified some things that, okay, we need to take another look at this and how we're approaching this in terms of how the workflows are built and how the SQL is laid out to make sure that we're capturing some of those things that are business essential for our users.
And I'll just add one thing to what Jeff was saying. Some of it's ongoing kind of day-to-day maintenance, but also things like, like Jeff mentioned, we have a couple of different reports that are custom SQL where we have a lot of that same information in the data model, but maybe we're missing a couple things in there. So, if we can get rid of one thing to put it in there, it's going to reduce some of that too. So, well, thank you everyone for the time. And if you have any questions, let us know. We're here.